the previous video, we covered in great detail the controversial persistent unit mechanic introduced into vanilla ROTWK and various pros and cons of its inclusion in the War of the Ring mode. Now we come to the flip side of the coin, breaking down in detail the controversial changes incorporated by the Age of the Ring mod's overhaul of all of the mechanics of the War of the Ring mode that have been the same for decades, ever since vanilla BFME 2. The biggest changes in this overhaul include getting rid of the persistent unit mechanic altogether, completely changing the overworld map and RTS structures and their effects, the pacing of RTS games entirely, and generalizing spellbooks. But there's lots of detail in all of this to consider as we compare ROTWK to AOTR. For anyone who is not familiar with the Age of the Ring mod's overhaul, there is a lot to cover, so I'll start with the basics before getting into the weeds more, as it's important to really appreciate the major changes. Most people who do the vanilla games, even if they don't get into the mode, have at least a basic idea of the War of the Ring mode, such as its factions and structures, since they're identical to their skirmish counterparts. It's radically different with AOTR though. Vanilla War of the Ring is very straightforward in that sense. All RTS battles are the same as in skirmish, but with the added incentive that all battles are in this overarching plan of a grand campaign, which is amazing. But AOTR breaks with that tradition to offer something very new while familiar. Lots to cover as always, so let's jump in. Like I said, we'll start with the basics. Sticking with vanilla for a moment, on the Living World map you've got 4 build plots: a fortress, a basic barracks, a blacksmith, and a farm. The fortress recruits your heroes, defends that territory automatically, and provides resources per turn. A basic barracks plot trains all of your other units, except heroic ones and siege. The blacksmith provides upgrades to 3 units at a time and builds siege. And the farm, of course, provides resources. Very, very simple. And there is a relatively close one-for-one comparison of these to their RTS counterparts, the biggest exception being the fortress, much cheaper to build it on the Living World map. And what you build on the Living World map is included in the RTS match, though not the other way around. Comparing to the Age of the Ring mod, you can see similarities but differences in function. Here you can begin to see a difference in pacing a bit from vanilla. Some of AOTR's Living World structure costs are much higher, even while Living World resource output is actually lower for the fortress and farm by 50 each. And AOTR's fortress and elite barracks take 2 turns each, forcing you to have to time these as best you can when you're playing. The reasons for these changes will be made clear later in the video given their incredible bonuses to gameplay. Going over to AOTR's RTS structures, this emphasizes how much of a difference AOTR really makes to the gameplay, and how it's not so much a one-to-one correlation between RTS matches and the Living World as in vanilla. More detail on these structures and their severe limitations later. Here you can see more clearly how in vanilla you can recruit all Tier 1 and Tier 2 units from your Living World barracks, all heroes from your fortress, and siege units from the blacksmith. You'll notice none of these provide any extra bonuses. They're very simple and straightforward. This is different in AOTR. In AOTR, on the other hand, it's very different. The fortress provides upgrades to 5 units at a time, recruits heroes, defends the territory automatically, provides resources, and builds siege. But there are 2 barracks in AOTR, the basic one and the elite one. The basic one recruits all your early or Tier 1 units, the elite one recruits your mid-game or Tier 2 units, and your Tier 3 units. Tier 3 non-heroic units are unique to AOTR. Now we come to how much of a difference upgrades can make on the Living World map. In Vanilla, there is an interesting mechanic where the number of units you can upgrade depends entirely on how many blacksmiths you have. Each blacksmith lets you upgrade 3 units at the same time. Rare territories will have 3 build plots, making it ideal to have 3 blacksmiths on them for 9 upgradable units at once. This provides a rather nice sense of escalation to the game if you can manage to make the Living World map matter as much as it ought to. As we explored earlier in the series, this can be a challenge given the persistent unit mechanic. In AOTR, the upgrade mechanic has been greatly streamlined and simplified. Perhaps too much, honestly. To start with, I don't think there is more than one territory that has 3 build plots, and that is Gorgoroth. Rather odd, if true. Second, with the fortress now playing as Blacksmith 2, no longer do you have to spend 1,800 resources for 3 blacksmiths to upgrade 9 units if you wanted to. Now you will spend 1,500 to upgrade a flat rate of 5 units at a time, period, because you can only have 1 fortress on any territory. There is something rather odd to observe, however. If you have just a fortress plot, it shows you 5 units upgradable, but if you add a tier 2 barracks, it somehow bumps that number up to 8. And on the incredibly rare 3 plot territories, it can go up to 11 with a 3rd tier 2 barracks. But you are still locked at 5 upgradable units at any time. It's clear, as of this particular recording, that there is a bug somewhere. Whether it's just in the numbers showing the total number of units, or in the fact that you can't actually upgrade as many as it shows, I can't say. Something to keep in mind. But it gets better. In both Vanilla and AOTR, upgrades on the Living World map are completely free and take just 1 turn. The importance of this cannot be overemphasized. I'll show you later in the series how much of an impact they really make in both auto-resolve and RTS matches, but for now let me explore it in this way, going back to Vanilla. In RTS matches, you have to spend 3,400 resources to research everything, not to mention the amount of time it would take to fight to get this many resources, and to fully upgrade each unit would cost a minimum of 480 per unit, and 680 if you're upgrading units with both bow and sword. Now let's see them for free on the Living World map. You can see here my total money next turn will be 15,150. If these upgrades were to cost anything, obviously this would be lower, but boom, free upgrades. And you can see it works the same way in AOTR. One last note on upgrades in this video. Going back to Vanilla, while it definitely slows down the progression of the game to upgrade units in RTS matches if you don't have to, you are not charged extra for taking those RTS units into the Living World map. Here are 2 sets of units I just trained, and I'm going to upgrade one set while leaving the other without upgrades. And here's the 4 new units in the unit roster, all costing the same thing. Pretty cool. But as you'll see later in this series, the Living World upgrade feature is crucial for gaining the upper hand fast. It might not be so important in skirmish mode, where it eats up a ton of resources, slowing your eco down quite a bit, but in the War of the Ring mode for both Vanilla and AOTR, it matters a great deal. Vanilla and AOTR have some striking differences in terms of interactivity and mechanics. Vanilla's structures built on the Living World map also appear in RTS matches, whereas AOTR's living world structures do not, but have other mechanical impacts, which we'll cover later. And the great thing is, unlike in the vanilla games, these structures cannot be destroyed in RTS matches, so your enemy cannot just make a beeline for them and take them out in a hurry. Whereas in vanilla, they are physically present in an RTS match, giving that player that different kind of an edge. So in that way, the vanilla player is also saving some time and some money in some RTS matches, especially when it comes to having a fortress on the map. Vanilla Living World fortresses, after all, cost only 1,500 resources compared to the 5,000 in an RTS match. And if you've got resource multipliers from territory bonuses, even better on the fortress resource production. More on that later in the series, though. But like I said earlier, most can be removed from the Living World map if they are destroyed in the RTS battle. Here you can see an example of how in the vanilla game you can take out structures built on the Living World in an RTS match. This applies to everything except fortresses though. Even if you were to rebuild the destroyed structures, they do not come back on the Living World map. Here you can see I've got a strike force taking out his structures. I then take out what I want and forfeit the match. I don't mind losing some troops if I think I can do more damage to him on the Living World map with his base, such as if I know he's in debt and thus can't build structures on the Living World map. Notice that the barracks is gone, but the fortress remains. It's an interesting mechanic for sure. So even if the defending player has a narrow victory where he loses everything but one barracks tucked away in a secret corner somewhere, he can still keep that fortress. This helps to prevent some degree of abuse of the system, such as you bringing in a small but powerful sortie to quickly rush an undefended territory for the sake of removing the fortress, then forfeiting the match so as not to go through a whole RTS match once the fortress is destroyed. You bring in some cheap, upgraded units you don't mind losing when forfeiting. Now, you would think that a simple auto-resolve would do the trick much faster, right? But think again. Here's why. In both vanilla and AOTR, if a territory has a fortress, even with no unit on it, that territory will defend itself, forcing the enemy into auto-resolve the situation or into an RTS match. I'll get into how impactful this fortress can be later in the series. For right now, I'll just say it packs more of a punch than one might think on first blush. There is a great feature which compares to these Living World structures in AOTR called battle bonuses, which I'll get into a bit later. One of the most unusual but cool features found only in the Age of the Ring mod is the ability to fast travel with the Doc's overworld map territories. These are rare territories found only on the coasts of Middle-earth in the Age of the Ring mod that allow you to fast travel from one dock to another, whether you own that territory or not. So you can make some really cool surprise attacks on your enemy by traveling incredibly far distances in one turn. This is an especially cool feature for bringing the world of Gondor to life more, considering that nation's long history of naval conflict with the Corsairs of Umbar. A very nice touch. And as you can see here, it pays off in spades in the massive default open game scenario, where I can expand my territories clear over to the other side of Middle-earth in a blink. There is one last feature of the Living World map to cover, and that is fortress map territories. In either game, as long as you own that territory, they can automatically defend themselves, whether you have a garrison in them or not. In vanilla, though, they also come with one build plot to expand them, but otherwise provide typically only a PowerPoint territory bonus, nothing else. Notice that in AOTR, though, you do not have a build plot on any of these territories. However, you gain plus 300 resources per turn from these, and they are completely free. All you have to do is capture them. Recall that fortress plots you build yourself, as well as farms, put out only 250 per turn. Considering they can defend themselves and have the highest resource output, this makes these territories the most valuable ones in the game. Well, now that we've covered everything in terms of the Living World map, let's get into RTS battles. As I said earlier, Vanilla's RTS battles are identical to their skirmish counterparts, but not so with AOTR. Unlike in Vanilla, in AOTR you start with only one builder, not two, and cannot build any structure but one at first. To unlock the scant few structures you can build, you have to build an outpost, which is the heart of your RTS experience in very different ways from Vanilla's Fortress, which you'll see in a moment. This outpost, unlike Vanilla's Fortress, is completely free and can be built in a fraction of the time it takes to build the default fortress. In AOTR, there are only 4 total structures which can be built: your outpost, the primary barracks, a secondary barracks, and a tertiary barracks. Because there are no farms, instead the Citadel was made to be the one and only resource structure, so it pumps out a solid 100 resources per tick by default. It can get a resource boost to produce even more, but more on that later in the video. It is also the only way to increase your CP, so it provides a massive 900 CP upon being built. And this really forces players to better protect that structure, even more so because, like in the vanilla games, if you lose all your structures and builders, even if you have an army remaining, you lose the whole battle and your army. This is made even more keen by the fact that each structure is severely limited in how many you can build. You can only build 2 primary barracks, 1 secondary barracks, and 1 tertiary barracks. Of course, you can rebuild these structures if they're destroyed, but you're only limited to 1 builder at a time. Recall that in vanilla you get 2 builders from the start and can even have however many you want. And the Citadel or Outpost, you're limited to only 1, period, and it cannot be rebuilt, so if it's destroyed, you're in trouble. Notice there are no options to rebuild the outpost. Regarding the primary barracks, it can only recruit your basic tier 1 units and includes not just swordsmen and spearmen but also archers. The secondary barracks only recruits your tier 1 basic cavalry, and your tertiary barracks typically recruits only ranged siege units. So for factions which have short-range siege weapons like battering rams, those are typically removed. If you're playing as Rivendell though, which doesn't have a typical ranged siege unit but a special one, the Revelers, well, you get that faction's advantage to have some of the best siege in the game. The other faction with unusual ranged siege, ROTWK, has the Mummakill removed in favor of the giant scorpions. Unlike vanilla, none of these structures can be upgraded at all and thus only ever stay at level 1, so only early game unit recruitment in RTS battles. No other structures like defenses, special structures like wells, or anything else can be built. Radically different, and it's understandably got a lot of players up in arms. Here's what's going on with such changes though. Like in the vanilla games, you can choose to make early, mid, or late game units on the Living World map, but because you can only make early game units in RTS matches, it's far more incumbent upon you to carefully choose your units on the Living World map to carry with you into RTS matches, forcing you to use your mid or late game units much more to carry the victory. This is even more keenly felt given you cannot take units trained in RTS matches into the Living World map. Here you can see my army I brought into the RTS match at the top, excluding the bigger units, the heroic Swan Knights, which I'll get to in a moment. You can see I'm training up some new basic archers from the barracks.
We have 4 men from Morthund. Rest easy, men. 4 men.
I'll train 2 and then win the match.
Darters of the Blackwood Vale at the ready.
In vanilla, you'd see the 2 new units on the unit roster to keep, but there are no archers anywhere. And the Swan Knights I mentioned? Unlike vanilla ROTWK though, you are strictly limited to heroic units being made only in RTS matches, and only as summonable units from your spellbook. This is in part because in vanilla there is no limit on how many of these heroic units you could build or carry over, which, needless to say, is a bit of a problem with balance. And going back to the unit roster, you can see that heroic units do not carry over either. All of this focuses the player that much more on the grand strategy, namely on the living world map, to make games go by faster. Another aim of this overhaul is to increase your strategic prowess by focusing your strategy that much more carefully upon the units you recruit from the living world map, especially when it comes to the higher tier units. RTS unit construction is much less important in AOTR. Being only able to produce basic infantry, though, has an interesting effect. You need to use those infantry as filler much more than in vanilla. They'll be the ones taking the brunt of enemy attacks, while you can be more careful with your tier 2 and 3 units you bring into the match from the living world. It's a very different approach. You shouldn't be afraid to lose these basic units as you try to whittle away at the enemy, since you're not going to really lose anything in the long run. However, this major change to the mode comes with some obvious drawbacks, chief amongst them being, at least for me, lack of nuance. While it makes the RTS matches go by faster so you can focus more on the living world grand strategy campaign, it also has the potential to make every match feel too similar to one another, depending on the map especially. I'll give a fuller answer to this at the very end of the series when I give my final thoughts. However, an odd side effect, depending on how you play, is that many of these matches can be much more memorable because you are forced to keep your tier 2 and 3 units safer, especially if you're playing against a human player. More on this later. Overall, this change appears to be controversial at best for most folks I've seen out there. You can read all about the developers' choices and their reasons for them in this article. Basically, what it comes down to is wanting to make their War of the Ring feel more unique and different from skirmish mode. But I think there are other ways of doing this without sacrificing so much of the game. But moving on. AOTR's RTS experience goes a bit further than vanilla though, even for all that it takes away. They wanted their mode able to be played through more quickly, not dwelling on long drawn-out RTS matches as in the vanilla games, but opting instead for a focus on the living world map, making it feel much more like an old-fashioned board game you'd play with your friends at home or some such. And this holds quite true as you're playing it, forcing you into some pretty striking territory in regards to grand strategy gameplay, more akin to say Stratego or Risk. To enhance this vibe, new mechanics have been added to the living world map not found in the vanilla games, but mechanics which directly impact RTS battles to increase their speed and efficiency, getting you back to the living world board game approach that much faster. These include what are called battle bonuses. Whenever you build a structure on the living world map, that structure adds a unique bonus to an RTS match played on that map, such as being able to produce troops faster, let your units heal at the Citadel, increase the hit points of the Citadel, or have better resource production. In AOTR, these battle bonuses come into effect mostly through the outpost, for which you'll see different colored effects surrounding it, and all of them are free with the cost of the living world structure. For the Fortress Battle bonus, it increases the Citadel's armor by a hefty amount, acting like Vanilla's Fortress armor upgrade, but again, free. Recall that in Vanilla and AOTRs, it's pretty expensive, weighing in at 1,500 resources for each game with just a 65% boost to armor. Notice how for the basic Barracks Battle bonus, it's unit replenishment only, not healing. Unit replenishment typically only happens if your battalion is at level 2 or higher. But you can see that this unit is at level 1, but is being replenished near the Citadel. For the Elite Barracks Battle bonus, this one actually works through all of your different barracks in RTS matches, increasing unit production speed by 20% across the board. As you know, in Vanilla, you'd have to take the time to upgrade each individual barracks to get this speed. Although in Vanilla, those upgraded structures also get extra armor and oftentimes their own defensive upgrade. Not so in AOTR though. But you can see that there is still a description for the structures if you mouse over their portrait that states they can level up to 2 or 3. This is a feature which needs correcting as of this recording. but it's a handy reference to know how much you can instantly boost your production speed to almost max speed via the battle bonus. And the last battle bonus from the farm increases resource production of your outpost by 20%, which is actually a pretty sizable increase. And the great thing is, this bonus does stack with other resource bonuses, such as resource multipliers you can get from territory bonuses. Territory bonuses will be covered later in the series, but suffice to say, you can get some incredible resource production going in RTS battles. Different battle bonuses do all stack with one another, by the way, so you can have your fortress armor buffed while providing unit replenishment from it and boosting resource production, or any other combination including the unit production speed boost, and your citadel color effects will change to show that stack. Note that you cannot have two of the same battle bonuses stacked though, like two farm battle bonuses. Overall, battle bonuses work like various structure upgrades, spellbook powers, or special structures from AOTR Skirmish or Vanilla War of the Ring and Skirmish, such as the well or economy boosts, but without having to take the extra time and resources to build them. As a result, all of these work to streamline the game, making War of the Ring matches that much faster, but they also make those bonuses much harder for your enemy to remove from you, since they're instantly active and can only be undone if your opponent wins the match. So no matter what you have on your territories, you'll always have some sort of a mechanical edge over your opponent to defend that territory. It's actually a pretty cool feature. These bonuses are fairly powerful in that regard, all the more because they're free and instantly activated at the start of an RTS battle, thus saving you tons of money and needed time in an RTS battle, a luxury you don't get in vanilla. So they work to incentivize the risk in RTS battles for a territory's defender, even for how much AOTR's changes encourage turn-based overworld play over RTS battles. But as great as they are, they come at the cost of base building fun and creativity, not to mention the myriad great abilities that come from various faction structures, like their fortresses. And base building fun and creativity especially have always been some of the great appeals of the BFME games. But still, lots of great gameplay changes to consider. Now let's move on to the last of the major controversial changes to Vanilla's War of the Ring, the Spellbooks. But there were some other far more controversial choices made that have rubbed people the wrong way. In both Vanilla BFME 2 and ROTWK, whenever you entered into an RTS match, you play exactly as you would in skirmish mode, with all the amazing base building fun and unique spellbook rosters for each faction. Here you can see how all faction spellbooks look in Vanilla War of the Ring mode. They are exactly the same as in skirmish mode. While each of them will typically share one or two of the same powers or the same type of powers as other spellbooks, you can see that they are all very unique, befitting each faction. In the Age of the Ring mod, however, this was drastically changed. Now, all good factions have the same spellbooks, and all evil factions have the same as well. Here are just a few factions to show my point. You can see that the only powers which differentiate the spellbooks from one another in the good factions are two summon slots, which allow you to summon different heroic units for each faction. Otherwise, each good faction has the exact same powers as one another. And while the evil faction's roster of abilities is completely different than the good faction's, you can see from these few examples that the same principle as the good faction's powers applies here as well, only the summon slots are different for each evil faction. Something noteworthy to consider, by the way, all of AOTR's spellbook powers cooldowns have been cut in half in comparison to Vanilla's to accommodate the faster style of play AOTR implemented. This doesn't sound quite as dramatic as it may seem on the surface though, considering virtually all powerful AoE effects were removed, so you can't go about nuking each other in record time. Unless, of course, you're dealing with the Eye of Sauron power in AOTR. By the way, if you want to learn how to access and change the code, I've got some great introductory modding tutorials on my channel for beginners. One of the most fun, while also at times frustrating aspects of the BFME games has always been working towards getting your big spellbook powers, and in the War of the Ring mode this holds especially true given how much more work you have to do to get to that point. But in vanilla, to nuke someone with a big power like Mordor's Fireball would take 12 minutes, whereas AOTR's Eye of Sauron is 6. And the good factions don't have a destructive equivalent. This has been a singular source of frustration for a lot of folks I've seen in forums, because you have to work that much harder and take that much more time in AOTR to build up your armies, having that hard-earned army obliterated in half the time, and you not being able to return the favor as the good factions feels disjointed, to put it mildly. The Eagle's power for the good factions simply does not pack the same kind of punch, especially considering they can be taken down by archers fairly easily. What's more is, the rest of the game has a pretty even pace in AOTR's War of the Ring, letting you build up your armies with heroic units as the ultimate reward in your spellbook. For me, this has always felt just too much at odds with the Eye of Sauron. Given the nature of these controversial changes, I thought it only appropriate to give my own personal views on them and give my own speculations about what I've observed in the BFME community. First, regarding the generalization of the spellbooks. I have to admit, I don't fully understand the reasons for this change myself. I can understand wanting the heroic units to be contained because of problems limiting them in the code, but this only goes so far, at least to me. Making all spellbooks the same removes a sense of uniqueness for the factions. If they wanted the spellbooks to remain unique for their War of the Ring mode, why not just make each of them completely different from their skirmish counterparts and make them different from one another in the War of the Ring mode? This would make sense considering the lack of base structures for sure, given that Isengard, for example, can't use its eco powers. But they could have, say, had an eco power on the Citadel in some special way to reflect Isengard's eco powerhouse nature. Or maybe utilize the battle bonus system in some unique way to accommodate each faction better. Individualize the battle bonuses per faction to really shake them up. It just seems kinda lazy, if I'm perfectly honest, to universalize this aspect of the game just for the sake of making them different from skirmish. I don't know how else to look at it. Like they didn't want to spend more time than necessary on this or something, so they oversimplified it. There are a million other alternatives they could have chosen to be more creative. I don't get it. But I don't want to dwell on this, so I'll move on. But I will say that while I don't understand this choice, it doesn't kill the whole War of the Ring overhaul either. I'm not going to focus on just this problem to the detriment of everything that's actually good about the overhaul. I think one of the reasons at the heart of why these changes are so controversial is that many players enjoy a sense of continuity. I've seen many times in BFME forums where people will ask if there's a way to play in skirmish battles several kinds of maps in certain orders without having to end skirmish battles every time. They like the feel of one great sweeping arc, much like in the books or the films, where your actions at one point have direct results on another in one epic struggle. That is by far, at least for myself, one of the great reasons why the War of the Ring mode has historically been so appealing over the decades of the BFME games, going all the way back even to BFME 1 with its Living World map. There's always been a real sense of escalation to the War of the Ring mode, of consequence and reward to everything you do, and traditionally it's all been in the RTS format of being able to build your bases, not just your armies, the way you want to build them in every battle, full of all the fun and uniqueness inherent in each and every faction. That's just how it's always been before the Age of the Ring mod's overhaul to it in its 8.0 release. Breaking with tradition so much rubs so many people the wrong way, I think, because it breaks the immersion that everyone has always known. Much of the appeal of these games has always been how different each faction is from one another. It's why skirmish has been so popular for so long. But for the folks who really enjoy taking the slower, more methodical approach of the War of the Ring mode, who don't really hold to the faster pace of skirmish, but who still want that immersion the games are known for, it's only reasonable they would be upset to see so much of it changed or taken away outright, especially given the RTS side of AOTR's changes accommodates a faster approach. I think for many people, some of the great changes like the new map come at the cost of just too much. The Age of the Ring devs, after all, stated in their article they just didn't want quote-unquote skirmish plus. But at the end of the day, for too many people, the whole draw of BFME as a whole is all but gone. BFME is, after all, an RTS game, not a turn-based game, and while it's commendable they really tried to breathe new life into an aging game, for many people they just ended up taking too much of the life out of it. Battle bonuses, while interesting and cool, are a subpar replacement for individualized and carefully balanced bases and real-time armies. Generalized spellbooks hold no weight to the meticulously tuned and well-crafted complementarity they are in skirmish, and the removal of so much content deprives players too much of the things they love, even for all the additional new content incorporated to make it feel new and fresh and different. People love what they know best, and traditions withstand the tests of time for a reason. They appeal to the needs of people, drawing them in and making an impact. So it is with the rare devotees of BFME's War of the Ring mode. Well, I think I've said my spiel on the controversial changes. Undoubtedly, I'm going to ruffle some feathers, while others will be full of praise. But what do you think? Did the devs go too far, or maybe not even far enough? Do you prefer the old-fashioned vanilla, or do you like AOTR? What's your ideal War of the Ring mode look like in this modern age of modding? Shoot me some comments and let's talk some BFME. In case it's not clear, I do like AOTR's War of the Ring overhauls. All you have to do is just see my AOTR War of the Ring playlist to know that. I generally accept the changes they made, even while not always understanding or even agreeing with them, but it's still lots of fun at the end of the day. To me, it's kinda cool having a couple different versions of this classic mode out there with different ways of balancing it all out. Ultimately, it's just more to love. By the way, if you like this kind of deep dive and want more great BFME analysis of its mechanics, check out these series of mine. There's the Attribute Modifier series where I break down in great detail how modifiers actually work, comparing the vanilla games to the massive overhaul the Age of the Ring mod implemented over them. I also break down the fire mechanic, concluding at the end of that series with a great talk on the mechanic from one of the developers of the game from way back when the BFME games were coming out. There's also the Stealth series, where I show how stealth really works, again comparing vanilla to AOTR, and the beginning of the unit analysis series with the Berserkers unit. I also have a growing library of tutorials on how to use the BFME world builder and how to mod, along with lots of great gameplay videos besides. Well, this just about wraps up this video. The next video will be all about territory bonuses and how much of an impact they can make on your War of the Ring campaign, depending on which scenario you play. I'll go into great detail on the differences between the vanilla game and AOTR as always, a video the likes of which you won't find anywhere else, so stay tuned.